Now we are going to take a closer look at each of the main character archetypes in the game, including what these archetypes represent in terms of Greek mythology, as well as in the realm of ideas. Some of these characters are rather difficult or impossible to firmly seat into one distinct archetypal mold. That's just Bioshock being Bioshock, turning everything on its head. It happens time and time again, and it really makes for an amazing story. I mean, you really aren't going to do anything great until you break the rules, and Bioshock breaks so many rules. Given the superb storytelling of Bioshock and the dynamic nature of this narrative, it should come as no surprise that several of these characters can be found doing double duty, overlapping certain roles with each other. So as we go through these archetypes, we're going to see several characters pop up a few different times. The hero. Jack Wynan, the game's playable character, is the hero. The role of the hero by Journey's End is to incorporate the key aspects of the story's main characters within himself. The hero accomplishes this primarily by confronting these other characters head on. He may not need to vanquish every character along the way in order to achieve this goal. The hero may only achieve this goal by struggle and great sacrifice. The hero must make very important choices in the story which affect the outcome. The genius of Bioshock being, of course, that it turns the concept of the hero archetype on its ear. Yet, by the end of the game, with the closing sequence, Jack, as the hero of the story, has firmly been established as he reaches the end of his life surrounded by loved ones, all of whom are forever transformed by his heroic actions. In this story, Jack's beliefs, alliances, and ultimately his identity shift in such a way as to incorporate the key positive elements of every major character in Rapture by the end of the game. Jack exists as a sort of conduit between which every other major character may relate to each other and themselves. After all, playable characters are most typically the center of the universe. The brilliance of Bioshock, of course, is that the player is left with the feeling that they are too somehow part of this narrative, insofar as they consider the possibility that the player has indeed been most certainly played by the game. It's just completely, the idea is completely turned around on you, right? It's just brilliant. If there were any characters from Greek mythology in which to compare Jack Wynan, it would initially have to be Mercury, the messenger of the gods. Throughout most of the game, Jack is doing the bidding of Fontaine, helping to fulfill a vision, if you can call it that, and delivering upon certain beliefs of what Rapture should be according to someone else. Jack carries the message of Fontaine for a good while before the most defining moment in the game, where Jack is transformed from Mercury and into a sort of Theseus type of character in Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, Theseus is the hero who is tasked with destroying the Minotaur on the island of Crete. Only this version in Bioshock has Theseus assuming the role of the Minotaur. It's brilliant. In order to progress further in the story, Jack has to become the bull, become the monster, become the big daddy. He becomes the Minotaur, right? It's Theseus becomes the Minotaur. It's amazing. And it's yet another brilliant flipping of the tables of conventional storytelling that we find in Bioshock. Next are the Threshold Guardians. Threshold Guardians can be any type of character, both major or minor, which directly challenge the hero. Every time a foe is vanquished, it makes the hero even stronger, incorporating certain elements within himself. Foes that survive the encounter with the hero often end up as allies to the hero, such is the case with the hypnotized Big Daddy plasmid and choosing to rescue the little sisters. In the case of Peach Wilkins, pictured here on the far left, he is literally guarding the threshold or locked metal door which leads to Fontaine Fisheries. And incidentally, the name Fontaine Fisheries so early in the game is a big clue that something is definitely fishy, as it were, regarding Frank Fontaine. The Herald. The archetypal role of the Herald is filled by Atlas. While technically no longer alive and being impersonated by Fontaine, it is Atlas who introduces the player to Rapture. The Herald introduces significant change in the story and is responsible for ushering the hero along the narrative. Ironically, the name Atlas comes from Ayn Rand's novel Atlas Shrugged, which is a reference to the small group of the best and brightest carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. Should they shrug off this burden, the world would fall to pieces. Of course, in this case, with Atlas, he bears the weight of the poor on his shoulders. And yet again, another interesting contrast of ideologies, or another interesting flip of the script by Ken Levine. The shapeshifter. How many of you had Fontaine down as the shapeshifter? If playing the role of Atlas to Jack is Fontaine's doing, then most certainly the character archetype of the shapeshifter is played by Fontaine. As Rapture's most cutthroat opportunist, it is Fontaine who remains the most slippery and elusive character in the game. The shapeshifter presents many masks to the hero, hiding his true intentions and loyalties. Fontaine, as the ultimate opportunist, takes advantage of every situation in any way he can, trampling on the notion of virtues and morals in order to achieve his aim, and completely losing his humanity in the process. Fontaine is likened to Zeus of Mount Olympus, using the very same combination of treachery and brute force to take hold of Rapture as its supreme leader. One of the biggest clues in this regard being that his apartment is at the very top of Olympus Heights. Given the complexity of the story in Bioshock, we cannot forget that there are several layers of archetypal character elements happening in the story all at the same time. One of the most compelling aspects of archetypal character arrangements comes down to the use of perspective in storytelling. I'm not talking about the perspective from which the story is being told, but the particular perspectives of each character in the story and how they orient themselves in relation to one another. Great storytelling like Bioshock resembles the perfect slice of baklava, if you know what I mean. Which is why Jack is also filling the role of the shapeshifter right along with Fontaine, yes. Albeit he does so from a different perspective and in a totally different sense. Jack begins the story being completely controlled by Fontaine. Later on in the story, with the help of the mentor Tenenbaum, Jack frees himself of these chains and even changes his form into that of a Big Daddy. While Jack isn't purely the shapeshifter from the perspective of the audience, from the perspective of Fontaine, Jack most certainly becomes an elusive character. And the role of the shadow is shared by Fontaine and Jack, since Jack is a direct result of Fontaine's scheming. The shadow represents the hero's greatest fears, and it seems that Fontaine and his puppet Jack are largely to blame for Andrew Ryan's vision crumbling right before his eyes. Although from the perspective of the audience, we know that most of it was Ryan's undoing, right? Ryan's undoing was essentially Ryan. The shadow is everything the hero rejects in himself. If the hero is to survive and overcome his shadow, he must integrate those qualities which he rejects. which is why I throw in a wild card here, as Andrew Ryan is actually the anti-hero, which isn't an archetype I initially wanted to put in, but then I thought, you know what, this makes perfect sense. Because Ryan starts to question himself a little bit, but he doesn't fully integrate his shadow, which is why he is why he's dead, right? What Ryan and Fontaine have in common to the bitter end, of course, is their belief in their vision. So it's not their vision, because their visions are different. And Fontaine really doesn't have much of a vision other than wanting power. But they both hold these beliefs. They elevate these beliefs as if they were gods themselves. So, of course, the biggest difference is that Ryan actually does start to question himself somewhat, indicating that if he could successfully integrate his shadow, he would somehow survive. And in a certain respect, the remnants of Ryan's vision still do survive, whereas Fontaine's legacy most certainly perishes with him, having no real vision or ideals of his own other than his solipsistic quest for power. So it's interesting because Andrew Ryan is almost the hero of the story. He definitely is the anti-hero, but he's almost the hero of this story. It's very interesting. And of course, Ryan's Greek god archetype would have to be none other than Hephaestus, the god of metalworking and industry, cast away from Mount Olympus by his own mother because of his deformity. In a not so dissimilar way, it is Ryan who casts himself away from civilization as it is routinely accepted due to the massive deformities of morality he witnesses at the hands of government, instead choosing to forge his very own destiny. The gods and governments be damned. We also know that since Ryan is of Jewish descent, this sentiment of not quite fitting in and feeling the need to escape persecution by creating his own world is also an important influencer in his decisions. Also, the fact that Ryan builds his own version of utopia at the bottom of the sea, which is as far from governments and religion as he can get, in a way, this symbolizes man moving away from God. In the Jewish faith, to move away from God is to move further from the guiding light of loving virtue and to descend further into chaotic darkness. For if a man has nothing at all to truly anchor himself to in this world other than what amounts to an interchangeable belief of this or that flavor, it doesn't really matter, then he should at very least choose wisely to identify with his ignorance, orienting himself instead in terms of virtue and God's law. This quote from Andrew Ryan sums up all of the encompassing theme of Bioshock, right? This is this quote, could I have made mistakes? And he says, one does not build cities if one is guided by doubt, but can one govern in absolute certainty? I know that my beliefs have elevated me just as I know that the things I have rejected would have destroyed me. But the city, it is collapsing before my... Have I become so convinced of my own beliefs that I have stopped seeing the truth? Perhaps. That is the message. That is the message right there, which is essentially saying that control for any of us, whether it be Andrew Ryan, Fontaine, or Jack, is completely an illusion. And what ultimately drives humanity is belief. Mankind is a species which is constantly seeking answers to the ultimate questions, unwittingly or otherwise. None of these questions have been answered in the ultimate sense, and they won't be answered by man. Not in the realms of religion, not in the realms of science, art, industry, or anywhere else have the enduring questions of humanity been answered, nor will they. The kind of unanswerable questions can only hope to lead to belief, and nothing more than this. Beliefs which cause entire cities to rise and fall, beliefs, when elevated to the levels of gods, can drive an entire civilization into madness. Ultimately, what makes Andrew Ryan the anti-hero instead of the hero is paradoxically the very same thing which created rapture in the first place, which of course is belief. Belief is what fuels the actions of all who inhabit the world. One could say the same about facts, since it is belief in facts as true or false, or belief in a certain set of facts as superior than another set of facts, or simply more appealing, a set of facts that's just simply more appealing. You believe it to be more appealing. This is what accounts for our actions, not the objective facts in their own right.